we're going to continue to use Process Hacker to monitor, investigate, and manage the open ports. And we are going to also using Windows firewalls to block the attacker. We're going to make sure that the setting has been completed, especially the Windows 2016. We need to make sure the internal interface has been enabled. So let's change the adapter settings and look at the inside, and let's look at the property. And in the IPv4 property, we make sure that it has 10.0.1.1 in there, and the DNS server has been set to Google 8.8.8.8 or any public DNS server of your choice. And we have to enable it. So once we enable that, we'll make sure that Windows 2012 can actually ping it. Right-click on the box and then send the control alternate delete. Now, CHANGEME. Get in here. Right-click on the window box, and we can open the command prompt. We don't need the server manager here, so we can close it by clicking the X mark over there. ipconfig, again, to show that it's 10.0.1.12, and we can ping 10.0.1.1. So that's the first step. Then we can launch the attack or FTP from the Windows 2012 to Windows 2016. Now in the Windows 2016, we want to make sure that we install Process Hacker. We drag it down a little and look at File Explorer. Under download, we have downloaded Process Hacker 2.39. So double click that, and we're going to run it. Accept it, and click next, next, and let's finish it off. Right, so Process Hacker is up. We're going to go to the server manager and enable the TFTP services, because I rebooted a box. Once we reboot a box, all the previous setting is gone. So we look at the tools. You sometimes have to drag the bar up and down to see the menu. Look at the tool and go back to IIS. And what we will do is we will take a look at the site. Again, we did this one in the previous curve ports exercise as well. So in the site, we are going to add a new FTP site, my FTP. Physical path, as we talked about that previously, is in INETpub and FTP root. Is that okay? Next, I'm going to go faster because we already did this one before. So no SSL and all unassigned, and let's go next. Go with anonymous and basic, and let's do all users. And give them all the rewrite, so that's easier to. So that's FTP server is up and running. Now let's go to, just want to make sure I'm in the right box. If you click the wrong one, it will be the host instead of the virtual machine. Now we're going to download. This is a download folder, and then just select everything. And let's copy it, just like what we did last time, and go to C drive, INETpub, and FTP root. So when we do a DIR, we can see it from the other box. All right, so this is done. Drag this bar up, reduce it, so we can see that. The searching menu on this CurvePort is straightforward. They have 4 tabs here: the processes, and the services, and the network connection. So in here, we can see that there are 2 of those Microsoft Azure server in here. You can type in here, say established. So then, or you can say, hey, port 443. Okay, and we filter it out, or we can say established probably is the one we want to see. EST, established. Then we can open it up, drag it out a little bit bigger, and you can see there's a process of the 2296 here. So if you take a look at 2296, and you go to the process, and you will be able to, you will see some of the limited filtering because of the EST keywords there. So what you will do is you are going to take it off, and then let's just take a look at the network and highlight this one and go to the process. And you will see that, all right, so this is the process. And which one is it? The last one, because the 2296 here is matching your process ID of 2296 in here, okay? So now let's go back to the, review of the document. We installed the CurvePort, and then we reinstalled the FTP site, and we actually take a look at the CurvePort's Microsoft connection here, and we will try to take a look at the remote server that we connected to, and see who owns that process. So let's put it on the side, follow along with the documentation, highlight here, and then you can right click, and then there's a tool here, and you can say, hey, who is? So if you click that, it tells you that, hey, this box actually belongs to Microsoft. So it's a convenient way to identify which box, which host is your remote host that you connected to. So we are going to try to duplicate or repeat what we have done with the CurvePorts using the FTP on the Windows 2012, and then launch the attack. So I'm not going to do the Wireshark again, so let's just go ahead and FTP to 10.0.1.1, and this time administrator change me, so, and do a DIR, and sure enough, it's in there. So let's take a look at this one. So you will see that you would have the connection. So the established from the box. Easier for us to see. Yes, established. So you can see that port 21 FTP has been established from the window box. The remote 2012 to 2016 connection has already been connected. We can right click again here, and then we can go through the process, or we can close it. So let's close it. So once you close that, if you go to Windows 2012 and do another DIR, it's going to tell you the same thing. The connection has been closed by a remote host. So let's exit it out. So this is the first part of what we have done with the CurvePort. So let's go back to 2016, and let's take a look at the remote connection to this update server. Right click, and we can actually close it. And once you close it, it's going to open up again. because it's in the background, repeating itself. So if we want to terminate it, then we can terminate the whole tree again here. Let's take a look at it. So we're going to right click on this one and go to the process. So clear this one as well. And if you close it up here, you will see that this process is more clear, 2296, and match that. And right clicked, and we say, hey, terminate the tree. So when we terminate the tree, okay, after we terminate the tree, if you reduce your curve pool, you can see that, hey, your window desktop, the Explorer is actually closed, it's gone. So we need to bring it back. And this leads towards one of the discussion or question. How are we going to bring the window explorers back? We're going to use just option 1. So you highlight, you put your focus on the desktop view, and you press Control Shift and Escape. And you can click on the more details, and then File, and you're going to run the new task. And we're going to run EXP Explorer. And once you run it, you can see that the background is up and running again. And you can go back to your curve port. Drag it up and down. So the inconvenience, you can see that, okay, it's got, try to re-download with the setting with different server here again. So you can see that the process come back, and it is still Microsoft Update Server in Azure network, right? So we are going to now mitigate this kind of attack. Before we do that, we will run the OWASP attack. So we will go to the Windows 2012 and launch the same attack again. So once we launch that attack, let's go to the 2016 to see that, oh, we got a lot of them connected. And make sure you put down the established here, so we can click on the first one. And then you're going to drag it all the way down. And you can say close. Let's see. Drag it all the way down. Highlight it here, right click, and let's close it. A very effective way of clearing it, because this is a DOS attack, and we got quite a few packet, quite a few connection got established before we can even close it. So finally, we close all of the attacks. All right, so let's use it, and let's go back to the Windows 2012, and you can see that the attack eventually stopped right here. Now here comes to the part that we are going to mitigate it today using the Windows Firewall. Windows Firewall is, in this particular situation, is not really the most effective way to mitigate this kind of attack, because we are going to just create a very simple rule to block the IP address from, of the attacker. And we all know attacker could forge with different IP addresses. And if you block that, you might DOS yourself even further. For instance, they can say, hey, they pretend that they were sending from 8.8.8.8 Google server. And if you block that, then yeah, you block the other legitimate DNS requests as well. So the more the sophisticated, the better way to mitigate this kind of attack would be the rate limit. So the connection to the services, they should have a certain rate instead of try to bury the server, take away all the resources, request a 10,000 connection per second. And that should be done at the firewall level. Usually it's done at the ISP level in the real world scenario, okay? So sometimes they slow down the request and slowly train the target host's resources and try to perform a denial of service attack. So we are going to turn on the Windows firewall here. You will highlight on this window and then press the window key and just F-I-R-E, type in firewall. One more time. So we are going to choose the advanced security here on the firewall. Click that and window firewall property right here. We're going to click that. And we have a domain, private, public. We can just go ahead and turn it all on. So to be safe, we'll just turn on all the firewall on that. And you can say, okay. So I'm finishing with the firewall already been activated. So in that case, we're going to try that out with Windows 2012. Again, go to the command prompt. Pin 0.1. Now firewall is on, so you can no longer ping on that. Okay. And let's try this. Let's try to launch the attack again. Run the attack. And you can see that the connection is still up and running. And I have a question there to ask you there. Why do you already have the Windows firewall up? And how come the curl port still sees the connection comes in, launching the attack, and the attack still successful? The short answer is that you are actually a provider for the services. So your firewall is already open up for that kind of request to come in. So the firewall, it has certain rule to mitigate certain attack, but it doesn't consider more sophisticated attacks such as the DOS that's requesting so many to establish so many connections and so much resources and train your service. So that part, you need to have different settings of the firewall, more like intrusion detection of the rate limit to mitigate this kind of attack. Okay, so let's highlight it and let's drag it all the way to the end and press the Shift key and click it again, right-clicked and close it all. So it's not done yet. And oh, okay, now everything is clear. Now we are going to follow this step. I'm going to bring this document up here. Now the attack still successful, and we already discussed why it still succeeded. Now we are going to implement a firewall here. So we're going to open Windows Firewall again, which we just did, turn it on, and you're going to create an inbound rule. And then we'll follow the step here to create that. After we create that, then all the incoming requests from the attacker will be blocked. So we are going to open this firewall menu again, and in the inbound rule here, right-click, and we're going to say we want to create a new rule. And then we're going to select custom. It's a custom rule on it, just like step number 13 did. And we're going to click next. And so leave it with the old program and go to next. And then so we're going to leave the protocol to any, go to the next. And then we are going to block 10.01.12. So in here, we are going to just block which remote IP address does this rule apply to. We're going to click on the add, and we're going to add 10.0.1.12. We're going to click OK. So we can actually select a range of the IP or just single one. We're just going to pop in one of those IP address, and then we're going to go next. And we're going to select block the connection. Now we're going to go next. There's 3 of those different area where we can apply our firewall to. Just apply it to all of them, and next. And we can call it BLOCK. You can call it anything else. We'll say here BLOCK block DOS. How's that? You can put down description or not. Finish it off. So now after that, let's go to Windows 2012. And now we're going to say OK. And now we're going to run the attack again. And you can see right away without going checking, the connection now is 0 in here. Okay. So if you go to 2016, you're not going to see any connection coming in. So back to the document asking you to comment on this kind of mitigation. It's a quick, easy way to complete this exercise. But if you think about it, as we just discussed, attacker usually can forge, borrow any legitimate IP and pretend it's from say, Google's DNS server, or from Microsoft, from Intel, from anyone. In fact, in a few weeks, probably in a few months, we will deal with packet crafting. We will craft the attacking slammer packet and using the legitimate Verizon DNS server 4.2.2.1, Google's DNS server. We're going to borrow all this legitimate IP address and pretend that's from us to send the slammer packet to our SQL server. So we will perform that part too. And so it comes to the way that we have to mitigate it with a more sophisticated IPS policy. That completes our discussion for this particular video.